Good morning. My name is Paul Keijzers, and I will share my screen. Let's do it. Oh, I saw a message. I just got my Mac reinstalled, so one moment. Share my screen. Please let me know if you see my screen.
Yes.
All right. All right. Today I'm going to talk about Microsoft Graph fundamentals, and it's going to be a real fundamental. My name is Paul Keijzers. I'm a Microsoft MVP for a couple of years now. I mainly focus on Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. And we, as a company, KB Works, we do a lot of implementations in trainings, but also looking at how to implement Microsoft Teams. But this session is going about the Microsoft Graph, and I'm going to show you some basics and why Microsoft Graph is there. If we look at Microsoft Graph, what is it? Microsoft Graph is a lot of services which you can reach with one authorization call, and you can get to multiple services. So, for example, you can create teams, create tasks, add bookings, chats, all kind of stuff you can do with one call. It's very easy to use. You have some different authorizations, which I will come back on later on in this session. And if we are going to talk about Graph, in case of Teams, we mainly look at how can we set it up and what can we do with Microsoft Graph within Teams. For example, we can create a team with a graph call, add members and owners, configure the team settings and add channels, install apps, add apps, and archive or delete the team. And why is this helpful? Well, it's helpful because you want to have a system in place. Like Mallory showed you earlier, you can do a lot with Power Apps, which also can connect to the Microsoft Graph, but you can also do much more. For example, when we are looking at possibilities with Graph, we also can create tabs with Graph. We can have bots that interact with other services of Microsoft. We can create connectors which work together with the Graph, and all services that are displayed on my screen right now can work together with the Graph, and this makes it easy to develop via one platform, and also to connect as a service from, for example, if you have your own development application, you can create a connection to the Teams environment or to Outlook, so you can create bots, but for example also like bookings, which is in beta right now, you can create a booking via the Graph, which makes it extremely powerful to integrate with other systems. So if we look at where to begin, we begin at the Graph Explorer. If I take my browser and I'm going to have to for example, go to developer.microsoft.com, and I go to the Graph Explorer. Sorry? Was there a question or? No. Okay. If we go to the Graph Explorer, we have several options which are already there to start off with the Microsoft Graph. As you can see, I am already logged in, and I have the preview on, which makes it possible to have some extras. And I can search for some graph calls, like for example the graph call which is in here now. I want to have information about me, so it's a get. It's the V1 version of the graph, which exists out of two versions. It's a beta version or the V1 version. The bookings graph, which I talked about, is still in beta. So if you are going to use that, be aware that it can change. And we've seen it change a few times. If it's in beta, V1 stays the same, although we had one change a few months back, I guess. But if I go to run a query, and I will now, you will see that it directly responds, and I can see which response I get. So when I would use the graph, I can get the information about, in this case, my profile. But for example, I can also do a get my photo, which actually the graph call is me photo dollar value, which gives you the value of the information and directly responds in the data returning. So having said that, we have a lot of options to create graph calls. I think this is a real good tool to get to know the graph. But if we want to go one step further, we also have Postman. And I don't know if people know Postman. As Postman is a tool which is free to use, and you also have graph collections in there. To use it, I will go to the GitHub page. You can have graph collections, and there's a very well defined tutorial. Let me show you how you can do it. I will also post this link into the chat. And if we are going to use the graph with Postman, then we need to register application to get credentials. And to do that, we first need to download the Postman. We import these two calls. So you get the JSON file, which is imported. If I go in there, and I can show you at this moment, I have the graph imported here. So you can see it's on behalf of the user, application, or MS Calculus, which actually I haven't found out what this is doing exactly. But as you can see, we have multiple calls. We can have a call where the user authenticates or where an application authenticates. If, let me go back, we are talking about authentication, then we have several authentications, which is on the user, where the user needs to say, okay, I want this to happen, or that an application is doing it. And there is a difference between there. And for example, when we are looking at the documentation, you can see here directly what is supported and what is not supported. So in this case, create a group, which is needed to create a team eventually. You can have delegated and application permissions. I will show you in a few minutes where you can set them. Going back to the slides, you need also to give a consent that you are able to get the information and put it in the that you can use the information which you are getting or which you are posting to the service. So I will go on and move to Postman. As I told you, we have got the collection in here. And if we are looking at the environment, you have here, you can create an environment. So default, it's no environment. And if I click on the environment quick look, you see there are no settings set. If I look on my demo credentials, which is actually imported with the graph credentials, I just gave it another name. I can do a quick look and you see my client ID, client secret, tenant ID, and username, user access, all is filled in with these permissions. How do we do that? How do we set it up? Well, first we need to go to Azure. We have to do app registration. So in this case, I already created one, but I will show you how to do this. New application, we will give it a name, for example, Teams Fest. And here we can set who can have access to it. In this case, I will show any Azure ID or Microsoft account. And I have to do the platform, which is optional, but I will register. Now the app is created, and what you see is that I got my tenant ID here, my application ID, and as you can see, it's still empty application app registration. So, but for creating a call to the graph, we need client ID and a client secret. If I would do that, then we need the authentication first. And here we can set the authentication. Let me check, because I think I made a mistake. Yes, I made a mistake in the URL. Go back endpoints. I lost here a bit. I first go to the authorization. I add the platform. I'm going to choose web, and I'm going to put in the redirect URL, which is HTTPS localhost 8080 for this time. And I want to have access tokens, which are used for your applications, and ID tokens, which are used for personal. So then I click on configure. It's going to be added. And as you can see, this is the redirect URL. But for Postman, we need a different URL. And I have to check which one it is. So I will go to my app, which I already created here. And I need this URL. It's also documented in the GitHub, but I just got to get it from here. I go here, back to the authentication, and I will add the URL to Postman. And this is the callback URL. After I've saved, I will also check what's happening. It's not giving me the correct response. It is. Okay. When it's done, you can get a callback to this application. Further on, we have the certificates, and here we create a new client secret, which we need for connecting our app, our Postman app, to the environment. We give it a name, so it doesn't matter which name, and we can say, okay, this application may have access for 1 year, 2 years, or never. In this case, I choose for 1 year. I click on Add, and it generates a client secret for me. Normally, I would copy this, but I already did, so I will show you in the environment. Once we have done that, we also need to set app permissions. And at this point, we only have the app permission user.read. If we are looking to give it consent, for example, for this application, I'm going back to the overview. I will copy now I have to check the tenant ID or the application ID. One moment, I will check it, double check it in here. Okay. When I'm copying the tenant ID, and what I did, I will show you this URL because this is the URL which I'm going to use. If I paste the URL in, I have to give in the user content or the tenant ID, which is this one, and the client ID, which is this one. And once I filled it in, I also have to give it a state, which is a random number or string. And as you can see, I give admin consent to the application. And this is the redirect URL. It's a callback. So when I push enter, it will load. It will ask me to authenticate, and in this case, I'm using the other service which I just already created before. And when I click on sign in, it will ask me which permissions I want to have. So, for example, in this case, I already pre-registered a few settings. If I click on accept, it would redirect me to the Postman, but because the Postman is not accessible from here, it's only giving me a white screen. Going back to the app registrations, I can go to the API permissions, and in the API permissions, I can add permissions. And as you can see, you have multiple APIs available which you can use. In this case, we are going to choose for Microsoft Graph. And here we have the delegated permissions, where the user signs in, and the application permissions. So in this case, we are going to choose application permissions. And as you can see, all services are mentioned underneath it. And I can do, for example, team read basic and give them permissions. So the app has permissions to access a list of all teams. When I do this, I can say, okay, I want to have it admin consent. So I want to grant as an admin that everybody has access to it within the tenant. Now I did. So if I would go to the registration or to this page which I just show you to give consent for a user, it would pop up and say, okay, please authenticate. What I can do to show you the right example is go to the API permissions. And as you can see, these permissions just showed up earlier. But if I want to have more, I can do by Microsoft Graph, for example, do delegated permissions. If I want to view email, for example, for users, I can add the permissions. And once it's done, and I go back to this URL, which I just gave the permissions to, you will see that I get the same consent again, but it also holds the mail. If I can find it in here, sign in, create groups. I don't see it in here. It should be here, actually. Okay, but it should normally be here. If I click accept, I accept the permissions. If I go back to Postman now, and I have this client ID, client secret, I will fill it in, and the tenant ID, I can use it to connect to Office 365. So in this case, I will go for applications, I will go to get users, and it directly opens, and when I click OK, it says my authorization is not working. And first I need to get app authorization token. So I'm doing this. It gives me back the barrier, and the barrier code is actually your access code. And in the case of the collection of Postman, it also writes back the information to the environment variables. This is already done by the team, so it's very nice to use. And as you can see, the app access token is now filled in here as well. So when I go back to get users, and I do it now, it will give me back all users directly in this environment. So Postman is really a good way to get information and to do without going to the Graph Explorer, do some get information and put it in here. This is an application, but for example, if I'm going to do it on behalf of a user in Postman, that's also possible. First, we need to get the access token from Graph, and normally you come in here and you go to authentication. You put this one on OAuth 2.0, request headers, and then get a new access token. If access tokens are available, you can manage them here. And in this case, this is an old one, so I will delete it. I will also delete it in here. When I do a get new access token, I get information which I first need to fill in. In case of Postman, you can also use the variables which we declared in the under the iDrop. to fill in. So you don't have to put in the client ID every time and the client secret. So in this case, I'm going to request a token. And as you can see, this is the token. I guess it's even still the same. So it's not expired. I will copy the token because I will need it. And in the scope, you directly see what permissions I have with this token. So I say use token, and when I do a send now, it will get my information, which was already there because I did this. When I'm going to the environment quick look, I see that this is the user access token, which I just got with this get access token using Postman. And I click on edit. Then I will fill in the new access token. I will do it in the initial environment and in the normal. So in the initial value and the current value. Sorry for that. Now, for example, we want to create a new team. How do we do that? We can do create a group, which is not directly available in the collection. So I created it myself. It's doing a post, which means I send information to the graph, and I will get back information directly. In this case, we choose groups API, and to create a group, we have to check here. To create a group, we have an example, which, for example, is this call, and we have to fill it in the body, and it should be raw, and you must be aware that it should be JSON. In this case, I already created one group for this, so I will create a new group, and I will call it Teams Fest 2020. I will copy the value. This is this description, the display name, and the mail nickname. So you directly set up the mail nickname. To be sure, let me show you that at this moment I don't have the theme here, and I will create it with the send button now. So I will create the theme. In this case, Team Fest 2020. So as you can see, it went very fast, and it created this is the response, which I got back. Now to create a team, we have to do create or copy this ID, and do another command, which is a put. And as you can see, I did it with the previous one. If I put in here the ID, and at this point, there's still no team here, but once I've did a put and ID and /team, and I also added some JSON to set some presets, and I click on send, it will create a team in the background, and I will show you in a minute. You get the display name back, you get all the information back of the team, so you can directly use it. When I'm going to my teams now, you see there's here Teams Fest with a general channel. So this is just an example of the power of Microsoft Graph in combination with Postman. Then I still have a few things I want to say about creating groups, because once you need to create a channel, for example, You don't want to have all permissions across the tenant to have access to all groups. There is coming a new API or a new way of doing granular permissions, so your admin will have some rest. And these are the new ones. I haven't seen them yet, and you also need to do in Azure. You also have to set the user settings, so be aware of that. Next to that, I want to show you the Office 365 CLI. Office 365 CLI is from the PMP team, and is initially created by Waldek Moskowitz, and it's very powerful if you are used to use PowerShell, but you are on Mac, which doesn't have the controls. Then you can use the Office 365 CLI. I installed iTerm for that, and I've installed the code for it. So I will create 365 to start up the CLI. Now it's started. Now I have to do a login. And what happens on the background, it creates a call device login, where you can say, okay, this is my device, and I have to copy it because it's not my default browser, and have to fill in the code I got here. So I will do that. Now I need to sign in. And as you see, it gives me all permissions, or it's requesting all permissions. So I click on accept. And now I'm signed in. And now I can do a lot of commands. So for example, we can use the graph, where we can have all the schemas, but I also can use Teams, for example. If I go into Teams, I can set app, channel, fund settings, everything that's there, and they are continuously creating new items to it. So it's very good to have the CLI as well when you are creating scripts and use the CLI. If I continue, I only have some resources left to show you. These are resources where you can get more information about Microsoft Teams, but also about Microsoft Graph, how to use it, and it's I think it's one of the best tools around at the moment. I will go back to the screen. If you have any questions, please let me know, else I will be here for a few minutes, and let me know if I can be of help. I will switch off my camera and go to mute. But I hope you liked my session.